USAA knows dynamic duos can save the day, like superheroes and sidekicks or auto and home insurance. With USAA, you can bundle your auto and home and save up to 10%. Learn more and get a quote at usaa.com/bundle. Restrictions apply.
Whatever the occasion, effortless elegance is right this way. Because Hilton brings you new ways to stay courtesy of the Nomad London. And it doesn't stop at award-winning dining in a space draped in velvet and illuminated by vintage chandeliers. No, this day goes beyond with unparalleled personalized service and attentive hospitality. Oh, and did we mention the Nomad London can be booked using your Hilton Honors points at Hilton.com? Hilton, for this day.
So, you just started using LinkedIn Premium. Now what? Well, on your premium company page, you noticed around 7.5 times more page engagement and 5 times more page views. Well done. And now, new clients are messaging you. All because you're using LinkedIn Premium, which helps you get the business growth you want. Think big, small business. Think big. Start your free trial at linkedin.com/premium small business. That's linkedin.com/premium small business.
Are you still quoting 30-year-old movies? Have you said cool beans in the past 90 days? Do you think Discover isn't widely accepted? If this sounds like you, you're stuck in the past. Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. And every time you make a purchase with your card, you automatically earn cash back. Welcome to the now. It pays to Discover. Learn more at discover.com/credit card, based on the February 2024 Nielsen report.
All right, Duke fans, DBR Bites, episode 106. We got more Duke news. We got more stuff happening to talk about. I'm Jason Evans. Donald Wine could not join us today. Donald is at a wedding. He is doing the whole wedding weekend thing. And we tried to figure out a time to get him on here, and it was like, it just ain't working. He was like, can we wait till Tuesday, until after Memorial Day? And I said, no, we got a new Dukie we got to talk about. So Scott Rich is with me. Scott, you have been like a regular to some extent over the past, since the season ended.
We're gonna have to have a conversation about if there's a third seat at the table that needs to be more permanent, but we can have that offline rather than live on the air.
Yeah,
live,
there you go.
quotes.
Exactly. I have editability, so if the conversation doesn't go the way you like, I can edit it out.
There we go. The live and major quotes for podcasting.
Right, exactly. There's no such thing as live on this podcast. In any event, we're here because the Blue Devils on Friday afternoon, as we sort of teased earlier in the week, I think a lot of us kind of saw this coming, maybe. Sebastian Wilkins from the class of 2026 said, no, I'm going to be in the class of 2025, and I'm going to be attending Duke University this fall. I want to point out one thing, actually, before we get to who Sebastian Wilkins is. John Shire is just ridiculous recruiter. It's like, it's insane the way he continues to do this. There were a lot of people that thought Sebastian Wilkins was going to pick Maryland. The Maryland Terrapins were his other finalist, and they had pulled out all the stops. And they had a more obvious role than Duke did. Now, I'm not saying Sebastian Wilkins was going to Maryland to be the starter, but he was going to be more in the rotation than he probably is going to be at Duke. I've seen a lot of people, Scott, I've seen a lot of comparisons to Darren Harris, not in terms of his game, but in terms of his role next year, that you know that this guy is a really good player in practice, that you know that this guy is someone who has a real future in a Blue Devil uniform, but that maybe this year isn't going to be a big role kind of year for him. But despite all that, which I think probably is true, I think maybe he's a little more in the rotation than Darren Harris was a year ago. Darren really, for the most part, only played in games that were non-competitive. Maybe Sebastian, like I say, a little tiny bit more playing time than that. At least partially because I think the Duke roster isn't quite as deep as it was a year ago. I think we're 10 deep. Last year we were 11 deep. Darren was 11. This year I think Sebastian is 10. But for John Shire to reel in a guy like that with an explanation of here is what your future is, here's how we develop you, here's how we make you into someone who can be more than a 10th man at Duke. And Sebastian Wilkins went, yeah, I want that more than I want a bigger role at Maryland.
I think not only does this speak to Jon Scheyer's recruiting prowess, which we could go on and on about, it speaks specifically in this situation to the Duke brand's power. Sebastian Wilkins is a kid who says Duke is his dream school, and everyone says, "Oh, Duke is my dream school." Blah blah blah. No, no, no. He has the receipts. He has the Instagram posts going back 6, 7 years ago of him in Cameron saying, "This is where I'm going to school." So if that's a kid that you can't root for in a Duke uniform, a kid who quite literally grew up dreaming of being in the Duke uniform, you can't root for anyone. And that, again, Jon Scheyer had to bring that guy in. There's a lot between, being the 10th man at Duke versus being firmly in the rotation at a Big Ten school. That is a very, difficult decision to make. Jon Scheyer closed the deal. But Duke's in such a different position than any other school in the country in terms of this whole generation of kids who grew up watching JJ Redick and then watching Jon Scheyer in the 2010 national championship and then watching Kyrie Irving and then watching Jabari Parker, and we could go on and on and on, right? There's a whole generation of kids who grew up with that Duke that is now coming into adulthood, and they grew up with Duke players on their wall, so to speak. That's something that's going to continue paying dividends.
I think you actually went too far back. I mean, my bet, if you
that's true.
I mean, I think a lot of it is I watch Zion Williamson. I watch.
We age ourselves whenever we do that.
Yeah, I watch the Jones brothers. On and on. I watch Marvin Bagley and on and on and on. Grayson, you name it. These guys. First of all, there is not a Duke era that you can't go, oh, I saw. But I actually think especially Zion and those guys who really made Duke cooler than it had ever been, and that has kind of continued on from there. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I love seeing that. We've gone back and found pictures of Sebastian Wilkins at the age of like 12 or 13 visiting Cameron and being like, this is where I want to go. By the way, props to him, because there are tons of kids who do that and don't make it to Duke. My sons, I went and visited Cameron with them when they were that age. They were like, this place is so cool. I want to play basketball here. And I was like, you're not playing basketball here. I've got bad news for you. I know my genes. You carry my genes. We're not going to play basketball here unless we break in and play at night when the security guards don't come and run us off. Oh, okay. Let's get into Sebastian Wilkins' game a little bit and talk about what he will be and what he can be in a Duke uniform, because this is a guy he's a good athlete, a very good athlete, but he's not someone who like pops off the page as a run jump kind of guy. He is very nicely skilled. He puts the ball on the floor and gets to the rim, gets in the lane really, really well, has very good touch around the basket and in the lane. He is developing into a better and better outside shooter. He's not someone that you're going to go, he's not going to take pull up threes on the move. At least I don't, that's something that needs to develop for him. But as a spot up, if you've got a guard or someone, if you've got someone going to the bucket and he spots up around the perimeter, Sebastian Wilkins can knock down the 3-pointer. But I think his real value is as a rebounder and as a defender. He's 6'8", a legit 215, 220. I mean, this guy he's got some bulk on him. He's a power forward. He projects mostly as a power forward. I've seen a lot of combo forward kind of talk. I don't think he's a wing at Duke. Again, he might, there's some positionless basketball that happens. Absolutely. But I project him more as a power forward than anything else. And the defensive instincts are really, really strong on this kid. And I think for next year's team, the major role he plays is he's the guy who probably bangs against Cam Boozer in practice a lot of the time. And that's a hugely, hugely important role.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting that our recruiting class now has 2 6'8" guys who have very different games. Nick Kaminia, obviously, as more of a shooter, probably can play more of a large 3, whereas Wilkins does profile more as a legitimate power forward. The thing that stands out to me is that his game does seem very much like the modern power forward in modern college basketball and modern basketball moving forward as well, where he is 6'8", he does have that powerful body, but he doesn't play like the traditional plotting power forward that you might have thought of 10, 15 years ago. He looks fluid when he moves. He runs the court very, very well and gets up and down. He's definitely seems like, while he may not be a lob threat the way we think of, the super athletic up, jump athletes, he gets up and down the court very well. He does make spot up threes. Everything about his shot looks fundamentally sound.
Yeah.
He shot about 40% during his travel season in 2024, but then his high school season that was more like 30%. So I think there's some variance in where that is. But again, at his position, if he's shooting 35% from three, that's something you'll take from your four-man with that body type any day. So he profiles as the type of power forward that Jon Scheyer has been targeting, that has that more modern feel to his game, that gets up and down. And I think the question with him is, how quickly does he add strength to his frame so that he can really be that four guy, so that he can guard against the larger fours that you are going to see in the ACC, that you would definitely see if you're playing a team from the Big Ten or the SEC. And then the question becomes, where is that shooting going to be? If 40% from three is where he really is, if that's his reality, then he's going to play sooner rather than later. If 30% is his reality, then we're in, Mark Mitchell-esque territory, where those other parts of his game really have to be so significant pluses to get him onto court early. I do think, though, you mentioned that his primary role is going to be that practice guy. It's worth mentioning now that we have our 5-on-5s in practice with Wilkins in the fold. Yeah. And that is a non-trivial, check on the to-do list for Jon Scheyer's offseason roster construction. And for Cam Boozer to be going up against a guy who is, again, he's Sebastian Wilkins, we're talking about him like a guy who, is barely going to play this year for Duke. He's still a top 30, top 40 recruit. Oftentimes when you see these guys reclass up, you see a massive drop in the rankings. The consensus across all the recruiting sites is still, no, this is a high 4-star caliber guy in the class of 2025. So this is someone where the upside is there. Maybe he has a Pat Ngongba style, freshman year. That is within the realm of reasonable possibilities. But I think the most likely scenario, like you said, is a Darren Harris style trajectory. But having him in practice so that Cam Boozer is going up against someone who is going to test him, who is going to take pride and know that, hey, I'm here and I belong at Duke and I'm going to make Cam Boozer earn everything he gets in practice, that is hugely, hugely valuable. The other thing, too, we should keep in mind is that at his size, he could play some small ball 5, not long, not, probably in ACC action, but in practice. So I wonder if maybe there's some scenarios where we challenge Cam Boozer in practice and we put Malik Brown on him in practice. And we say, hey, it might be more important for that matchup for Cam Boozer's development.
I was actually thinking about that. And I think, yeah, you will see. First of all, I think Duke wants to get Malik Brown more than just Pat Ngongba backup minutes. I think we'd be crazy not to. Malik Brown is so impactful. I actually think that when Duke wants to practice that way and have Malik Brown guarding Cameron Boozer, which, by the way, great way to develop Cam Boozer's game more and more and more, to put literally one of the best defenders in the country on him.
And that's when
we do that, we probably have Ufechukwu, who steps in and plays a little bit of defense in the post there. And frankly, I think it'll be good for good for Pat Ngongba to see someone who is bigger, who is his size. Malik Brown is a little undersized for the 5. He can play it because he's an incredibly skilled in so many different ways. But I think for Pat Ngongba to get minutes against Ufechukwu probably is very helpful for his game, because that's the size of guy Pat's going to be playing against for the most part. So, even though we talk about Sebastian Wilkins as the 10th man in all likelihood, Ufechukwu is not a non-factor, especially in those practice scenarios. And I think when that happens, Wilkins maybe steps aside for a little bit, and that's when you get Malik Brown over to 4, and it creates a different matchup for Cam Boozer to work against. So we just got into stuff that I thought we were going to do in the back half of the episode. So this is a good moment to
foreshadowing.
Yeah, exactly. Foreshadowing. This is a good moment to take a little bit of a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about Cedric Coward. We've gotten final word on what Cedric Coward is going to be doing in terms of the NBA draft, and it is as expected. We'll hash that through. And also we're going to talk about how this roster shapes up. Scott and I are going to tell you, is it everything that you would want, or is there something maybe missing? We'll have that in just a moment.
Make this your best season yet with nutritious 2-minute meals from Factor. Eating well has never been this easy. Just heat up and enjoy, giving you more time to do what you want. The meals arrive fresh and ready to eat, and most importantly, they fill you up and they're delicious.
Yeah, and this is the perfect time of year to get outside instead of prepping and cooking indoors. Factor powers your day with satisfying breakfasts, on-the-go lunches, premium dinners, and guilt-free snacks and desserts. With 45 weekly menu options, you can pick gourmet meals that fit your goals. It's easy to savor more this spring. Factor meals pack in the flavor with none of the fuss.
It's time to get started at factormeals.com/DukeBB50off and use that code DukeBB50off to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. That's code DukeBB50off at factormeals.com for 50% off plus free shipping.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
Hey, it's Bill Simmons from the Bill Simmons Podcast. The NBA playoffs are here, and Michelob Ultra is getting you closer to the game than ever with courtside seats and more. Enter now at MichelobUltra.com/courtside. Michelob Ultra Superior Access Courtside 2024 to 2025 sweepstakes. No purchase necessary. Open to U.S. residents 21 or older. Ends on July 1st, 2025. Multiple entry periods. Visit MichelobUltra.com/superior access/courtside for free entry deadlines, and official rules. Message and data rates may apply. Void where prohibited.
You're the perfect blend of elegance and style, and your ride should be no different. The 2024 Hyundai Sonata Hybrid meets all your needs, from business to brunch and everywhere in between. With head-turning details like a sleek front end, plus stylish interior, and an available 12.3-inch digital instrument cluster and seamless tech integration. Okay, Hyundai. Visit HyundaiUSA.com to learn more about the new 2024 Hyundai Sonata Hybrid.
All right, we're back from the break. Scott Rich, Jason Evans. Duke has brought in another recruit and also lost a potential. I guess he wasn't a recruit. He was a transfer portal guy, and you know the story. Cedric Coward, who committed to Duke about a month ago, maybe a little less than that. There was only a Blue Devil for a few weeks. He has opted to stay in the NBA draft. This is not a big surprise. And frankly, as excited as we were about getting Cedric Coward and then seeing all the great things he was doing at the NBA Combine, you were like, every time he did something awesome, you'd be like, oh, I can't wait to get that guy. And then you go, wait a second. that puts him one step closer to the NBA. And I think he has received the assurances, the advice. He is a very, very likely first rounder. I mean, there are even people who are projecting him to go right after the lottery. It's not, if he got taken at the very, very end of the lottery, you wouldn't go, that's a shock. If he gets taken, in the teens or the early 20s, that's where a lot of people are kind of seeing him at the moment. And it's not a surprise that he said, I've got to take that opportunity. I've got to go to the NBA rather than coming to Durham. Scott, how bummed are you that Cedric Coward's not going to be a Blue Devil?
I'm going to be honest. I'm okay, just because you see what this guy has gone through in his trajectory, and you just root for him regardless, right? And yes, he's not going to end up in Durham, but he's the type of guy that he's going to get this opportunity again. He's gone from someone who was not even thought of on the draft boards to probably being a first round lock. Like, you root for a kid like that who's had that trajectory. Also, we shouldn't sweep under the rug that he went out of his way to heap praise on Duke and heap praise on Jon Scheyer every chance he got at the combine. And, we were talking offline about this. You compare what Cedric Coward was saying about Jon Scheyer after knowing him for, less than a month, to what some players on other North Carolina schools were saying about their coaching staff and their college experiences. And you go, I wonder which team and which coach I would prefer to play for. So that's something where you get, hey, Cedric Coward did not have to do that. So you still, I'm okay with putting him as an honorary Brotherhood member, given the fact that he, like I said, that he did a lot of things and said a lot of things about Duke that he didn't have to. And you give a guy credit for that. You give him credit for the way that he handled the entire situation, that he didn't string this out. By all accounts, he told the staff enough so that we could go out and, put the full court press on Sarr to fill that hole. It would have been incredible to have that guy who's, lottery level talent, who has an older body in the fold. Yeah. But I think, as we talked about, in our last bites, if there was a replacement for him and his skill set out there in the world, in the portal recruiting world, Jon Scheyer got him in Dame Sarr. So yes, there's more variance in it when a young guy like that. Yes, there isn't that experience, but the hole has been filled that Cedric Coward was going to fill in this roster. Now the question is, how does that meld together with a young guy rather than an experienced guy, with a high upside guy rather than a high floor guy?
I think you're very accurate. I love that. That's a great phrase, by the way, that Cedric Coward was a high floor guy who also had a heck of a ceiling.
Yeah.
And Damasar is unquestionably a high upside guy, a guy with a limitless ceiling to some extent when you look at those skills in that young body. I want to ask you this. Now that we have I think all of us would agree, unless something really, really shocking, something super unexpected happens, we pretty much have the Duke roster for 25-26. We know who's going to be on the team. We don't know exactly what roles they're going to play, but you've got a sense sort of positions and where guys are going to fall and that kind of thing. Is there anything that gives you pause, concern? What do you feel like this team? I'm not saying that the roster construction isn't great. I'm not saying that this is going to be, in my opinion, a preseason top 5 team, just like last year was. This is going to be a team that will have a chance to compete for the national title, just like last year did. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the roster construction, but is there anything that you see that you're like, I wish we had a little more of this?
So there is, but I want to start with a caveat, which is, you could pick apart every team at this stage of the summer.
Absolutely.
You could pick apart every top 5 team that has a hole, because this is still college basketball. Yes, it seems like free agency, but it isn't quite that, right? So it's not like, I have a hole at offensive guard, let me go and sign that offensive guard. If I didn't sign or draft anyone, what is my GM doing? We still aren't at that level yet. So every team is going to have question marks. And if you're the type of fan that says Jon Scheyer didn't do his job because there are question marks on this team, I would challenge you to go find a team right now that doesn't have a question mark and point them out to me.
Yeah.
Now, that said, The question mark that I think is fairly obvious, I would assume you agree with, is who is going to be the shot creator. Typically, Duke teams have had either a ball dominant point guard or a Cooper Flag style guy, a forward who could handle the ball and create his own offense, who was the default when we needed a basket with time running down on the shot clock or the game clock.
Too soon.
I was trying not to go there, and that's where my mind went anyway. So the question is, who is that for Duke? As I thought about this, I think the answer, at least early in the season, is probably going to be Cam Boozer. And I think you say, okay, having your power forward as the guy who is your shot creator is sometimes not the greatest place to be in when that person isn't Cooper Flag, and Cam Boozer is incredible, but he's not Cooper Flag. That said, there are a lot of similarities between the roster construction for this year and the roster construction of Coach K's final season, the Paolo Banchero year. And there are a lot of similarities people have drawn between Cam Boozer's game and Paolo Banchero's game. And so I think that there's some similarities there. But there's also the reality that last Coach K team didn't have a traditional point guard either. The only guards on the roster were Jeremy Roach and Trevor Keels. Trevor Keels was not a guy who was really creating his own shot unless he was bullying a smaller defender. And Jeremy Roach certainly wasn't the Jeremy Roach we know and love until the end of the year. He really made his Duke name during March of that season when he was starting to create his own offense more consistently.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't surprise me if the early season answer for who is creating offense is getting Cam Boozer in advantageous positions. And then it's a development over the year to see who that person is in March to complement that. It very well could be Caleb Foster. I still maintain that Caleb Foster's body as a point guard gives him the upside to be that. His length at 6'5" and his ability to use his body gives him the upside to be able to finish contested in the lane. He hasn't done that yet. He hasn't demonstrated it consistently, but he's shown some flashes. So there's that upside there. Maybe it is Caden Boozer coming off the bench, a guy who, by all accounts, is a creator for others right now, maybe not as much for himself, but creators for others tend to develop into creators for themselves when they get that confidence, when they develop that shot. Maybe it is Dame Sarr, maybe or Isaiah Evans, maybe their ball handling skills take that leap forward in the summer in Durham, and that becomes more of a traditional shooting guard style guy. I think the question mark is there right now, but I think the position that Duke is in that 99% of college teams would kill to be in is there are a lot of potential answers to that question on the roster. And only one of those has to hit. Only one of those 3-4 options has to develop in the best case scenario to fill that hole. And that hole doesn't need to be filled in November. It needs to be filled in March and April. So again, I think that's the big question mark. I think that otherwise this team is going to have a lot of the hallmarks of the Jon Scheyer teams we know and love. I think the defensive upside is still very, very strong. The length across the board is still very, very strong. Obviously, the biggest question there is Pat Ngongba going to take a defensive leap forward? He's never going to become on Malawatch, but he's still 6'11" and big, so you would think he could be a plus defensively. That's the secondary question mark that is not nearly as big as the who is going to be that primary shot creator.
Yeah, I agree with everything you say, and I also had identified shot creation, and let me approach it slightly differently than you did, which is that one of the hallmarks of last year's Duke team, of this team that everyone thought, well, first of all, this team that almost set records for offensive defensive efficiency. One of the it's going to go down as one of the best teams to not win a national title. God, and it sucks to have to put that caveat on the end. But one of the hallmarks of that team was the ball movement, the passing. It was that we had multiple creators because you mentioned Cooper Flag a lot. You didn't say the name Con Knippel. I mean, the fact that they lost Cooper Flag in the ACC tournament and Con Knippel became the ACC tournament MVP by being the shot creator for all his teammates, was really, really impressive. And by the way, that team also had Tyrese Proctor and Sion James, both of whom are going to get drafted to play, guard wing in the NBA and be guy. Those are both guys who can be very creative with the ball in their hands. And they were like the third and fourth creators on that team. It's a little bit ridiculous when you look back on all of it. I don't see that kind of thing happening on this year's team, but I'm not saying every team needs to be like every other team. And I would mention a couple names that you didn't when you were going through guys who potentially could be that. First of all, Nick Hemenia has an incredible reputation for being a guy who sees the floor and who understands everything that's going on. He is sort of similarly ranked in recruiting rankings to where Con Knipple was. And I'm not saying it's likely, but if we'd had the conversation a year ago at this time, we didn't know that it was likely that Con Knipple would be the creator that he turned into. Right? It is not impossible to imagine Nick Hemenia turning into someone where Duke goes, okay, when he's in the game, he needs to have the ball in his hands because he makes great decisions. I'll give you another name, and we saw some of it last year. Malik Brown. Malik Brown is a heck of a passer for a big man. And we've been talking about the fact, I think everybody thinks Malik Brown plays a bigger role at Duke this coming season than he did last year. And maybe part of that bigger role is, let's get him the ball in the high post. Let's get him the ball out at the 3-point line a little bit more often, not asking him to put the ball on the floor, but asking him to see the angles, those back screens and the such. There was no one on that Duke team last year who was better at spotting a cutter than Malik Brown was. And then I'll go back to one of the names that you mentioned. I think Caden Boozer really could be an unusual point guard for Duke. It's been a little bit, you talk about Jeremy Roach. It's been a little bit since Duke's had a point guard who is looking to create for others more than himself. That's the traditional role of the point guard. And Duke just hasn't had guys who do that kind of thing a lot. But that's what Caden Boozer is. And, Caden Boozer was one of the top guys at getting assists in all of high school basketball last year. And it wasn't just, I'm going to dump the ball down to my brother who can overwhelm everyone in the post and get an assist that way. It was Caden Boozer going in the lane with the ball, forcing the defense to react to him, and then finding open teammates. And he and his brother were the most accomplished high school basketball players perhaps of all time in terms of they won everything everywhere they went. And part of being a winner isn't just like your own stats and the such. I think what Caden Boozer does is he makes things easier for everybody else on offense. So one of the interesting things about this Duke team, Scott, is that I other than Cam Boozer and probably Isaiah Evans, I'm not sure there's anybody that I know for certain what that guy's role is. There are even scenarios where Malik Brown is the starting center and Pat Gongba's backup. I'm not certain of anybody's role. And I think that Caden Boozer and Nick Hemenia are two guys who could surprise and be that creation force. Because Duke that's clearly to me the question mark on this team. That's clearly to me the thing that this team needs. And I just think it's going to be an interesting offseason of seeing how that develops, seeing the little hints we get from practice and such. When we start to they're going to start at in the next few weeks. We're going to have the K Academy. The guys are going to show up on campus. They're going to start having scrimmages, start working out together over the summer. And we're going to start to get those little videos that leak out. And I want to see how many of those videos, who's the guy who starts the action? Who's the guy who's initiating the passes in those videos? It's one of the biggest things I'll be looking for this summer.
I will say I've always been a big believer in those videos. until the summer of the Ryan Young 3-point shot in every practice video that never came to fruition. After that, I lost a little bit of my own faith in my ability to piece out the messaging from those videos. Maybe that was the point. Maybe the Duke social media team was trying to put us off the scent. But I will say, it is going to be a fun summer of, when we get that eventual, 10-minute unedited, scrimmage video, what the matchups are, is who's playing the four, Nick Kaminia or Sebastian Wilkins. How many minutes is Iffy getting at the 5? How many minutes is Malik getting at the 4? Who's bringing the ball up the floor? Is it Foster or is it Boozer? There are a lot of those questions that I think, more than the season, in a little while, because there aren't those clearly defined roles, we're all going to be looking through those, videos with a fine-tooth comb to see what the hints are as to what this roster is going to end up looking like.
The other guy that I want to see this summer is I want to see more of Darren Harris.
I was about to say, this is the one name that we haven't said anything about. And he was the guy, I think we all forget that he was the guy last summer who had a lot of buzz. Right. Yeah. There was a lot of buzz last summer, last fall. There was the John Rothstein, tweet when he went to a practice and said Darren Harris was the most impressive guy there. This time last summer, there was, that was the dark horse candidate. Right. Yep. So that goes to show you, both sides of the coin. It's going to be really fun to see what Darren Harris does with more opportunities this fall. But also the flip side of that is what we see in the summer and what we see in, June and July and August doesn't always translate into the actual season. That's what makes this season of contentless content that you have to create so much fun.
Thanks a lot, man. Yes. All right. That's going to do it for the latest edition of DBR Bites. Welcome to the Brotherhood, Sebastian Wilkins. The Duke roster appears to be set. Be pretty surprising if anything changed from here. So now we're going to begin to turn our attention to, as we've said, what do these guys look like when they arrive on campus? By the way, it's also we're inching close to the NBA draft. This is going to be a big draft year for Blue Devils. Almost certain to have 5 Blue Devils drafted, and we will be previewing all of that. We'll probably, as we have in the past, bring Jay Billis on to give us advice about the NBA prospects of all 5 of these guys. That Scott, that's gonna be my content, I think, probably over the next month or so.
I mean, with 5 guys drafted, that's a lot of content.
Yeah, exactly. Gonna keep you busy. All right. For Donald Wine, who is celebrating the nuptials of some friends. Donald's in the wedding, by the way. I want tuxedo pictures, Donald. I want to see you in a tux, man. For Scott Rich, ably subbing in as he does so often, I am Jason Evans, and this is the Duke Band. They're playing us out and taking us home.